Good morning, guys. We're still in the book of Exodus. We're going to be in chapter 23. We're going to finish 23 today. And we're going to keep going through what we're studying, and that's God's plan. God's plan instituted into the world. God's character instituted into the world through people, through principles, and through action. He's teaching us different ways to think and how to see each other that's in absolute counter opposition to what the pagan world is telling people. In the pagan world, we are nothing but equal to animals in the eyes of these higher echelon people. It becomes your class. It becomes your wealth. Things that we're very familiar with in this world. It comes to property ownership. It comes to what can you do for me? Can you protect yourself from me, the stronger one? Again, this idea of survival of the fittest, what we call Darwinian evolution, is a worldview that's been there since the very beginning. And it's the idea that mankind is nothing different than this creation, where God says He made us separate. So He wants us to see each other as separate. The way we see an animal, we should not see in the same value of a human being. Human beings are more valuable. What do humans have that animals don't have, by the way?
Spirit.
Spirit? Keep going.
Soul.
They do not have an eternal soul. You see that? So does an animal need you in the eternal scheme of things? No. They might need food, they might need water, they might need a trip to the vet. They don't need you. Whereas a human needs all of those things. Maybe a trip to the doctor, food, water, clothing, shelter, companionship. But what else do they need? God. They need God. And that is exactly what God is doing here, is finding a way to institute Himself into their lives through these principles, through these ceremonial things where they're not going to be able to do a single thing inside of Israel without thinking about God. And again, people say, well, that's because He's a tyrant and He wants all of these accolades because He's selfish and He's arrogant. But is He trying to protect Himself? No. Who's He trying to protect?
The bloodline.
The bloodline, but who else?
And the people.
Us, trying to protect the people. It's not God being a tyrant, it's God being a loving Father. And as I said, guys, a lot of times we have trouble with consequences. We don't like when God gives people consequences. But if it was us that was wronged, if it was us that was hurt, if it was us that demanded justice, we would want it. But the moment God has to come and get it from us, we say, no, He's a tyrant. We don't want Him to tell us what to do. God, help me with things. Help me make my decision. Give me things. Bless me. But don't you dare tell me what to do. Don't you dare tell me what to do. You're irrelevant in my life. So the whole thing we're looking at here, guys, is one, said in Genesis, is God real? But now, is God relevant? Do these people need these types of teachings? And you and I saw what happened in the pagan world. And you can study history and see without God. And that's our theme, with God and without God. And you don't have to look too hard or read too many newspapers or flip on the news to see in this world with God and without God. And you probably know friends and family in your lives where you can see the consequences, the decision making that they have, the actions that follow their worldview with and without God. It's not something that's gone, but it's something that God had to teach. God said, you will not make it without me. But then we got to look at, now we're going in a finite human mind for a minute. We're going to step down from God's level and come down and say, okay, if God is a God of justice, righteous, and law and consequence, He has to punish sin. In order to be God, He has to punish sin. And that's when we say, well, now we're all in trouble. Because we're all sinners. Not because of what Adam did, not because of what Eve did, not because of what anybody chose to do before you. You're guilty of your own sin. So you owe God a debt. You owe God a consequence. You owe God a punishment. So we say, well, how is God going to be able to do that? Well, God is also a God of love and mercy. So God said, I'm going to send somebody to die in your place. And the only way that works is if this person has never sinned against God, that owes God absolutely nothing. That's the only way this plan would work. And God is instituting that, as He said earlier, through a bloodline. He has magnified. And that's what the Bible is. It's not a history book. There's a lot of things in here that God does not have Moses mention around the historical principles of both Israel and the Gentile world that you have to study. But He is pointing you to these themes. Look at the bloodline. Watch what I do with Israel. Watch what I do specifically with Judah. Watch what I do with these specific people. You're watching a bloodline being protected, a bloodline being fulfilled. We recognize roughly here in the time of December, Jesus' birth, the bloodline was fulfilled. You realize how awesome that is? That you and I are studying this plan, hopefully going in it with the mindset that they are waiting and watching and wanting and craving Christ, knowing that we need Him. And every time somebody does something stupid or evil that hurts the plan, that hurts God, we're saying, what are you doing? We need you to do this. But when we get to things, again, recognized as Jesus' birth, we did it. God did it. He used the right people. He did the right things. He made the right decisions. It's ultimately God, He's going to, but He did it. And not only did He do it, but Mary was willing. And David was able to get a knot jerked in his tail where he was able to get it. Solomon was just good enough for a while there toward the end in Ecclesiastes when he realized that nothing without God matters at all. So if there is no God, nothing matters. Not a single thing in this earth matters if there is no God. Not a single, not your family, not your life, not your future, not your livelihood, not mankind's existence or continued existence, nothing. But because they were willing and usable by God, He got us the bloodline. So it is fulfilled. So what you and I are looking at now is Christ in our lives, instituted in our lives. And our third theme, Satan. Satan didn't like what he heard in Genesis. Satan didn't like being thrown out of heaven, getting kicked out of his room, kicked out of his own neighborhood, getting thrown down here to this created world that doesn't have God like it did in heaven. Satan's suffering without that presence of the Lord. He knows what he lost. So he came down here to take it from all of us. But Satan is a defeated foe. You and I don't have to be afraid of the devil. The devil didn't make you do it. What are we looking at? What's the third theme split to?
Sin.
Sin in opposition to God. Sin in opposition to God. When you're reading this account, you are going to notice when these people decide to sin against God, decide to rebel against God, decide to lie to and about God, and you'll see times when Satan makes a move and when Satan does something. And luckily for you and I, in this book, God has His prophets point him out. When He's talking to the king of Tyre, all of a sudden He starts talking to the devil. So who's moving behind the kings of Tyre and Sidon? Satan. Well, when God condemns Abihu and them Nadab and Abihu for touching the ark, and when He kills the priests of Eli, is that because of Satan? No. They chose to disobey God. They chose to rebel against God. When you have this mindset, guys, this Bible opens up so much more deeper and relevant. And as I said, guys, not just who God is, but why. Understanding God's law is understanding God's heart. I said that just as us with parents. New parents have been parents for a while. Some of us haven't experienced yet, but you get this idea of loving people and loving friends and family. Imagine if it was of your own blood. And you say, I want to do things to protect them. I want to help them. I want to stop them from making these wrong decisions. And how dare anybody tell you that the rules and laws you make to protect your own children make you a tyrant that exhausts you and makes you arrogant and selfish? Doesn't that make you mad? Aren't you ready for a war? How dare you? That's what we said. God's going to tell them, you keep my name out of your mouth. If that's your attitude, if that's your mindset, you might not want to bump into me. Because Pharaoh and his entire army bumped into me. And did it work out well for them? No. As we said, he said, who is the Lord God that I should obey His voice? And God says, can you repeat the question? They're dead. So we're taking these things, these principles. Now again, the ceremonial principles, not for us. We don't have a sacrifice anymore. Who's our sacrifice?
Jesus.
We don't have an altar. Who was the altar?
Jesus.
Jesus. So where do we come together to recognize this sacrifice in this altar?
Communion.
The Lord's Supper, in communion. You're going to see that in the tabernacle here in a minute. The table of showbread. So now, last thing I want to give you before we dig into this, God is telling a story. He's telling you and me a story. Not a story that never happened, but He's giving you a glimpse of a future plan. Moses is not going to just start getting creative and build God a tabernacle and think that he likes this and he wants to decorate it with these curtains and we'll put the table over here because it flows and it's feng shui. God's going to say, I want you to put the table right here. And I want you to put these curtains. And I want you to use these pillars. And I want you to build it this way. And He's not going to let them take one thing and change a single thing. Because what He's having them build is going to tell the story. And guess who it points at? Jesus. It points at Jesus. It's always going to point at Jesus. And by pointing at Jesus, you're going to notice that it points at the church. Is there a church yet in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament? No. There's going to be a kingdom. Right now it's a nation of people. Soon it'll be a kingdom. It won't be a church until Christ. You guys realize we're part of fulfilled prophecy. We're going to see ourselves as the lambs inside of the tabernacle. We say, dude, that's us. They made it to us. We see the table of showbread. That's our Lord's Supper. We see the laver of water. What is that? What's the laver of water? It's our baptism. We see the incense burning. What is that? Anybody know what that is?
Holy Spirit.
Okay. That's the oil. That's the oil.
Oh, yeah.
The Spirit's the oil. The incense burning, that's our prayers.
Oh, yeah.
What it tells us in Revelation. That's what Revelation does. It reveals these things. We can go back and look and say, I get that reference now. You know, Captain America, I understood that reference. So here we are in Exodus 23. Guys, there's so much stuff in this old covenant, in these old laws that so many people miss because they don't try to dig it deep like you and I. We're using those three things here. I'm going to start in 23. I'm going to start in verse 13. Chapter 23, verse 13. I want to hit this verse, and then we'll continue in. We're going to finish 23. In verse 13 it says, And in all that I have said to you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, nor let it be heard from your mouth. Why is God so strict? Again, is this his arrogance and his selfishness that he's a threat, that these gods are a threat to him and what he's trying to build? No. Who's he trying to protect?
The people. From the false gods.
Exactly. Now let's look at this and let's magnify it. Are they a threat to what God is building? These false gods, these demons, this demonic kingdom?
Well, yeah.
Absolutely. If they can annihilate the tribe of Judah, who's never born?
Jesus.
Who goes to hell?
All of us.
All of us. That's all it would take is for them to eliminate the tribe of Judah.
Because Mary could have sinned against her own free will also.
Yeah. Any of them could. You realize Jesus could have gave in to Satan.
Yeah.
He could have bowed the knee. He could have took and turned the stones into bread. When he threw him he could have jumped off the temple and showed the whole world who he was. But he didn't do that. He was willing to fight. And again, you see Peter get a glimpse of it. Didn't Peter deny Jesus 3 times? But didn't Jesus ask Peter how many times he loved him? Different ways. Peter jumps out of the boat. The book John doesn't end with Jesus. It ends with Jesus and Peter. And I love that. This little small story of Peter having breakfast with Jesus. Where he jumps out of the boat. He's so excited to see Jesus. Now, if you keep reading, they kind of all got there at the same time. So you can picture Peter jumping out of the boat and swimming, and then the boat just like going right beside him. And they're just like, what are you doing, Peter? But he was so excited. Because he told the people, I don't know this man. And now the only thing he can do is I want to touch him. I want to hug him. I want to see him. I want to cry on his shoulder. Because you got a magnification of who you really are. And when you see who you are as a sinner, this weak flesh, finite human being in the eyes of Christ, this loving, good, righteous God, you always feel dirty. And that's what communion is for, guys, is us to look at that dirt, to feel the guilt of that dirt, to feel the shame of that dirt, and then to wipe it off with the blood of Christ. It says, make no mention of it. Don't even talk about it. Now again, this isn't saying you can't tell them, Moses stood up against Heket, and Moses stood up against Ra and took down Horus. He's talking about an adoration. Keep their names out of your mouth. They're not the ones blessing you. I am. They're not the ones keeping you holy. I am. They're not the ones telling you right from wrong. I am the Lord your God. So this is verse 14. Again, understanding what God is doing. Verse 14, 3 times, that's our number 3, you shall keep a feast to me in the year. So he's establishing 3 feasts in the Jewish calendar year. There's 3 times God wants them to sit down and remember something. Are we forgetful? Mm-hmm. What about now? Are we forgetful now? Mm-hmm. What happens if we forget God?
Go to hell.
We go to hell. What happens if they forget God all the way back with the bloodline?
They go to hell.
Who goes to hell?
All of them.
Everybody goes to hell. Notice what's at stake here. And notice again 3. That's God's number. Number 15, you shall keep the feast of the unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days as I commanded you at the appointed month of Abib, for in it you came out of Egypt. None shall appear before me empty. So he's given us a call back to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We saw that when they came out of Egypt. He said you're going to 6 days and the 7th day. We got all those things. But he says, as I commanded you. That's one of the feasts. What does leaven represent?
Yeast.
What does it represent?
Oh, like spoiling.
Keep going. Biblical. Spoiling, corruption, pollution, sin. Looking for the word sin. Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. The leaven, this is a reference of sin, this pollution. Okay? This is what God's trying to show them. And yeah, the spoiling of the yeast, this idea of when the bread's baked. It's not all natural, good bread. It's fake. The first genetically modified organism, the first GMO, if you will.
Is yeast?
The use of yeast in the bread, yeah.
Oh.
Verse 16, and the feast of harvest, the first fruits of your labor which you have sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you have gathered the first fruits of your labor from the field. Again, we saw these feasts. He's taking care of not only the people, he's taking care of the land, and he even put a place to protect the poor, the people that are starving, and even what? What else did he give food to?
Animals.
The animals. He's taking care of all of them. So it says, 3 times in that year all your males shall appear before the Lord God. So now God says, I want all of the males 3 times are going to appear in front of me. Why male? Why has it got to be the man?
Because that was like,
Keep going. Go back to Genesis.
yeah, the main people.
Yeah. Who's the head of the woman?
Adam.
Adam.
The man.
Man. Who's the head of these animals?
Man.
The man, Adam.
Adam.
Who's the head of the man?
God.
God.
It's a fallen hierarchy.
Exactly. You see, we don't get in charge. We're not top dog. In fact, the opposite. We're the servant that gets beat when things get wrong. You know, we're the ones like, don't blame me, Lord. But that's what God wants, this fear and reverence from us. Now, are women just going to have nothing to mean nothing to God?
No.
You guys remember how I said how special women are? Why are women one of the most special things in creation, if not the most special thing in creation?
Because they give birth.
God exists as a male figure, as some male deity, as does the Son, as does the Holy Spirit. So when God created the first female animal, that was the first counter-opposite equality figure of gender in God's eyes. God is the man. He made a woman, something that exists outside of him, something he can't relate to. God is not a woman. He can't give birth. He can't do what women do. He created this special, and when he created a human woman for Adam, he created something even more special, the mother, this mother figure. Who do you want usually when you're sick?
Mom.
You want mommy. Who do you want when you're hurt, sad, or scared?
Mom.
Usually mommy. Now, if you're there and something's scaring you, that's when you get dad. You know, dad checks under the bed while mom hugs you.
You got a caretaker and then someone who, you know,
The nurturing figure. You know what's crazy? Is God is the father figure. So who's the mother figure? Jesus says, don't call anybody your father except God. You got God your father. That means we can't call ourselves father. We'll get to that later. It's talking about the priest. But is God your mother?
Yeah.
God your mother?
Yeah.
No. So who's your only mother ever that you'll ever have?
Your birth mother.
Your birth mother.
Why birth?
You see that as dads, we're substitutes for God. You guys are not. You realize that? You guys fill a void that can't be filled by anybody or anything else. God says they're going to need this, a part of this. I just think it's amazing. We get skipped over because we're just an earthly representation of God. You guys stand the test the whole time. Man, I just think it's people that don't know this, especially like the feminists, that diss the Bible, that diss God, that think he's this woman-hating sexist. They don't know him. And they don't know him, and because they don't know him, they don't even know themselves, which is why they can't even identify what a woman is anymore. You could be one, we don't know what it is, and if you're a man, which we don't know what it is, you could be a woman, which we don't know what any of these things are. So while you're being something, you're absolutely nothing. Goes all the way back to the beginning. You're nothing. Not an animal, you're matter, whatever worldview you want. So we're going here to verse 18. Okay? Now God's going to add something that points to Christ. You're going to start to see this, and then we're going to see a Hebrew idiom to talk about. Verse 18, you shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread. What does leaven represent?
Sin.
Sin. Can Jesus sin and be our atonement? No. Can we offer God the sacrifice of Christ with leaven in it? No. It had to be a perfect sacrifice. Remember, God's telling a story. He's not just making up rules to make their life difficult. Even if they don't know the story, you and I are what kind of Christians do I say we are? We're time-traveling Christians. We go back and we say, now we understand this. I understand what God was pointing them to. We get the whole plan. And then it says, nor shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until morning. We're going to get to that in Leviticus. Verse 19, the first of the first fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. So he wants their first fruits. He wants the best of what they had. Now you got to get this picture. Let me read this, and then I'm going to show you what this idiom is. It says, you shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Now does that sound like kind of random, kind of came out of nowhere? He's like, first fruits, annual feast, don't boil a baby in its mother's milk. We're like, okay, well that's kind of odd. When I was at Sunset Bible Institute, I had to do a paper that said that this was a Canaanite ritual. And I can't find anything that proves that. So what I did find when I studied it later at CKC is this is a Hebrew idiom that refers to not putting new stuff with old stuff. Doesn't mean the goat, it doesn't mean the milk. This is a Hebrew idiom. You're actually going to see this 3 times in the Bible. You're going to see it in Exodus 34:26 and Deuteronomy 14:21. And every time it refers back to the first fruits of your labor, your grain, your harvest. And he's saying you're not going to take what's new and mix it in with what's old. Now this is where the pagan Canaanite reference comes from, but it's actually not even Canaanite. It's an Egyptian reference more than anything. You had to offer your sacrifice, or not your sacrifices, your grain, your labor to Pharaoh and his higher ups. So what these people would do is they would layer it with all of the old stuff and then put the new at the top. So they're getting a basin full of grain that's only half good so that they can keep the rest for their family. And God's saying, don't do that. Don't do that. Give me the best of what you have. Give me all of it. My basin better be full. If I find a grain in there that's old, he says, don't give it to me. He's trying to separate them from this idea that they have to protect themselves. They have to fend for themselves. They have to provide for themselves. God is trying to show them, I'm going to bless you. If. Remember that back then? If you do these things. So we're going to see this idiom 3 times. Now does that sound familiar to anybody in the New Covenant, the New Testament? Gold star here is up for grabs. Does Jesus say anything that sounds familiar? Don't look at the idiom, not the goat milk reference.
The wineskins.
There you go. Gold star. It says you don't put new wine in an old wineskin. One, it's going to bust. New wine, when it expands, it's going to bust the old wineskin. And 2, is it going to taste real good? No, it's going to pollute the flavor. It's going to take away what it's supposed to do. And spoiled wine actually takes away from some of the health benefits of fresh juice. And the same today, yes, same forever. Same principle, same idioms. I just think it's crazy. And again, what have we been saying? What is it? What does God have going through the world? Cycles. Repeat cycles. And that's what the book of Revelation teaches. Cycles, not new cycles. So just keep that in mind. God separating them from that principle and God giving them a new principle. We're not going to put anything old in with our new stuff. Now, do we put the old law? Does Christ come into the old law? Is that what we mix together? No. He came and fulfilled the old law. Do we need it anymore? No. So now we've got a new basin full of all new covenant. Verse 20. Behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. So let's pause there for a minute. We got an angel now coming down. And we're going to see who this angel is in a minute. But it says to keep you in the way, keep you in the right direction. Does anybody know what Christians were originally called in the first century? We were called followers of the way. Does anybody know why we call ourselves followers of the way?
That makes sense.
Yeah. What did Jesus say?
I am the way.
The truth and the life. You see that? Isn't that crazy? So, going in the way. Is Christ an afterthought to God like a lot of denominations teach? And Christ was added later, these ideas came later. No, it's always been the plan.
All throughout the Old Testament.
That's why I said, guys, when you go through this, the way we're doing it, which you kind of did at Mountain View, but we're doing a deeper version of this. Dude, when you get to, he was in my Bible class. No, you didn't come to New Covenant with me, did you? Or God's Unfolding Plan with me. You had Hardman.
Yeah,
Man,
I think
you-
so. But I was on your last Bible class.
Yeah, heck yeah, you were. But when you get to the New Covenant, when you get to Matthew, Mark, dude, the story comes to life so much more different because you're seeing it everywhere. You know, a lot of people go into the New Covenant and it's new to them. For us, the New Covenant is actually what? The Old Covenant. Now again, you gotta be careful because the Bible says First Covenant, Second Covenant. But the New Covenant is older than the Old Covenant. You guys realize that? This law was given 430 years after. The book of Genesis gives us the first reference to the New Covenant. I'm going to send somebody to bruise the head of the serpent, the head of the devil, and he's going to bruise the heel of the person I send. That's the New Covenant. You realize that? That's the New Covenant, born of a virgin. That's how we know that's the New Covenant. So it's just amazing to me. Verse 21, beware of him and obey his voice. Do not provoke him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. So God's warning about this angel. Is this angel coming to be your best friend? Is this your guardian angel that's going to make sure that you don't die from an attack at work or something bad? No. This angel is to make sure that you stay on the path, on the direction, following the way, what you and I would know of later spiritually as the narrow lane. But notice what it says. Obey his voice. Okay, you see Mary make this, when she says this is Jesus, listen to him. God speaks out of heaven and says, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. But on the Mount of Transfiguration, he says, obey him. He's given an identity here. And then it says, do not provoke him. Why can't you provoke this angel?
I'll kill you.
He's going to kill you. Why?
Because you sin.
What are you becoming? Picture the bread. What are you becoming?
Leaven.
You're becoming the leaven. You're becoming the yeast. Okay? Do not provoke him. It says, for he will not pardon your transgressions. Can he be merciful right now?
No.
What happens if he's merciful to wicked people while they're alive? What do they do to the institution that God is trying to establish?
Promise it.
They destroy it. They break it. It comes away. It goes away. And what goes with it?
The whole plan?
The whole plan. The bloodline. The bloodline goes with it. And can there be any pardon for transgression right here anyway?
No.
No. Why not?
There's been no
Yeah,
sacrifice.
there's been no sacrifice. There's no forgiveness. And then it tells us right here how we know who this is. For my name is in him. Now, you and I have actually seen this angel. This is the angel of the Lord. This is Jesus.
Yeah.
We see him in this role in Revelation as one of the 7 angels. He's the King of angels. He himself is not an angel, except in the sense of the word messenger. That's what the word angel means, messenger. So when you have a messenger of God, or you have the messenger of God, and the messenger of God bears the name of God, this is God the Son. This is Jesus. You realize? So Jesus is going to keep them walking this path. So when he says, wide is the gate to destruction, but narrow is the lane that leads to righteousness, does he know what he's talking about? Mm-hmm. Do the Jews get his reference?
Yeah.
No, they should have. They didn't. They didn't get his reference because they were so pagan by the time Jesus showed up. Remember, when Jesus was born, they had to go back and read the scriptures. When Jesus says in John, the scriptures testify, they had to go back and look at it because they were so far removed from God, but they should have gotten. Same angel that protected your ancestors on the way to the promised land is what I'm trying to do as Jesus, Matthew 7, which is a narrow lane. Verse 22, but if. How important is but if? But if is a contingency. One good or one bad. But if you do this, then I'm going to do that. It says, but if you indeed obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. Notice what God says when I speak. When I speak, that's going to be this angel speaking. Is God completely in union with this angel? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. God the Father and God what?
Son.
God the Son. Now again, they're not going to reference that, or they're not going to get the God the Son references. We are. Then again, but if indeed you obey my voice, obedience is key. Verse 23, for my angel will go before you and bring you into the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. You shall not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but you shall utterly overthrow them and completely break down their sacred pillars. God just told you what the next link in the plan is. Again, that's what you and I got to realize. This is for us. As if God is speaking through them to us, which he is, saying, watch what I'm going to do next. Watch how I fulfill what you're a part of. And again, that's why I love going back into the Old Testament. Look what you're a part of. You're joining God's battle. It's like watching the prequel movies to one of your favorite movie series already. A New Covenant, great movie. And they're like, watch what happened first. Watch what led up to it. But notice this. He says, I'm going to go in, they're going to move out these people. Now, God hates these people, right? Amorites, Hivites, Jebusites, Canaanites.
He doesn't hate them.
He doesn't hate them, so why does he got to remove them?
Because they're going to corrupt the bloodline.
They're going to corrupt the bloodline, okay? Now, God's also going to be merciful because who reaches out to these people? Do we see God's prophets reaching out to these pagan nations of the world? Absolutely. So by moving his people through their areas, who do they get a chance to come in contact with?
Jesus.
Well,
Well,
God
God, yeah,
is
God,
what I'm looking
yeah.
for. But yes, they're going to come in contact with God through the people of Israel. You realize that? By God being wrathful and moving them out of his way, which is good because he's protecting the bloodline, which is protecting us for eternity. And then if they take a part of this, he's also going to introduce himself to them. Now you're going to see God as a war soldier with a sword that's coming to kill you, or you can see him as one of the priests coming to save you. And again, that's going to depend on your relationship. But then he says, don't bow down. Don't serve their gods. In order to make a covenant of peace with these people, if Israel was to go to the Amorites and say, look, we want to come through passage, and the Amorites said, nope, we're going to fight, unless you make a covenant of peace with us. How do you make a covenant of peace with these nations? Sacrificing animals to our God? To whose God? To their gods. By going through their ritualistic sacrifices, making covenants that sometimes involve physical intimacy. Sometimes it just involved an agreement over animals. And again, this is why God tells the Jews don't have ham. He doesn't want to be able to make a covenant with the Canaanites. Don't eat ham. Don't eat that meat because that's their covenant meat. That's their covenant food. So he's separating them. So now there can be no covenant of peace. Not because God doesn't want peace, but because he doesn't want what?
Corruption.
Doesn't want the corruption. He doesn't want those gods. And those gods are what?
Demons.
They're demons. The demons that Michael throws out of heaven, the angels, the fallen angels that come to this earth, are the people behind these false gods. So God is ultimately telling them, stay away from these demons. Stay away from who? Who's the third theme?
Sin.
Satan.
Old Testament third theme.
Oh.
Sin, yes, but Satan was what I was looking for. Stay away from him. Stay away. Don't talk to him. Don't go near him. Don't make a deal with him. We're going to run him out. That's what we're going to do. We're going to run him out. And then it says, and they're going to break down their sacred pillars. You're going to notice that later Israel's going to build pillars to God. This is God's superiority over the pagan gods. And we also see this in the book of Revelation. It says, I'm going to make you a pillar in the temple of my God, is what Jesus tells the church. I'm going to make you a pillar in the temple of my God. We are erecting a real temple to a real God. What are their pillars to?
False.
False gods. Demons. They can't help them. Was Heket able to help them in Egypt when God released frogs on them?
The what?
Was Heket able to help them in Egypt when God released frogs on them? Absolutely not. Not only did Heket not help them, this frog god that doesn't exist, but were the demons able to do anything?
No.
Nothing. Able to do nothing. Now you saw the demons try, because the magicians were able to make the frogs come, but could they get them away? Couldn't get them away. Again, God's like, hey, I'm just going to leave these here for a little bit. Verse 25. So you shall serve the Lord your God. Highlight that. Underline it. Circle it. Start. So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water. What is that a reference to?
Baptism and communion.
Okay, kind of. That's a future reference. What does it point back to? What two things did they complain about?
Oh yeah, not having.
Not having water, they were thirsty,
Yeah.
and not having bread, they were hungry. He says, if you serve me, I'm going to bless those things. You're not going to have to worry about those things. And then it says, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you. Now he's going to keep them from getting sick. But if. Notice that? Does anybody know if these people get sick later in the wilderness? They get sick and have to look at a serpent, a bronze serpent. Because they didn't what?
Listen.
They didn't but if. They did not obey God. So they're sitting there like, hey, you promised. And God says, I said if. I said if. It's a contingency. And that's the same thing to you and I. If we obey Christ, Paul says, if you hear his voice, if you listen, if today you would listen and hear his voice, if, then God can help you. Verse 26, no one shall suffer miscarriage or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. So you're not going to have to worry about babies having trouble. You're not going to have anything to worry about like the rest of the world does. I'm going to increase your numbers. By increasing his numbers, he's making what big? Keep going with Israel. Think of a couple things by increasing population he would make.
His kingdom.
Okay, what'd you say?
Kingdom.
Kingdom.
Yeah,
Okay,
bigger church.
what'd you say?
Bigger church.
Well, kingdom, that would go with that, kingdom. What else is he going to give them people for? What do you need to fight wars and to protect
An
you?
army.
He's going to make an army of them. And what do you have to continue all the way down to Christmas, kind of?
What is it?
What do we need to come all the way down to Christmas, kind of?
Jesus.
Jesus, the bloodline. He's going to increase a bloodline. Now again, only those of us that study the bloodline, which Satan will do, is going to know where these things are coming up. But for a while, he's kind of got to like spray shoot and try to hit everything because it's not until God specifies where it's going to come out. People think Satan's an idiot. He's not. He just doesn't know yet. So he's going to increase their numbers. They're going to be a huge military force. Does anybody know who they send first in war, by the way? You should know this.
Judah.
Send Judah first. Why would you send Judah first in a battle, in a war?
It's God's tribe.
What'd you say?
It was God's tribe.
It's God's tribe, but what happens if they get wiped out?
Jesus isn't born.
Jesus isn't born, so if God says you send the tribe of Judah first, what does that tell you about the battle, about the war?
They're
It's
gonna
going to be
win.
won.
Huh? What'd you say?
It's going to be
It's going to
won.
be one. They're not going to be wiped out. What happens if he's like, hey, why don't you guys send Benjamin out there? You're like, oh man, this is going to be bad. It's like taking on the San Francisco 49ers right now. Nobody's coming back. So again, you're seeing you can see it now. Later, they're like, wait, let's send him. They're like, wait, no, don't send it. Send Judah. And God's like, that's what happens because you didn't what?
But if.
They didn't but if. They didn't obey God. So verse 27, I will send my fear before you. Remember that fear, that reverent fear that the Israelites had at the mountain? He's going to send that into the other nations. The people are going to be afraid of the name of Israel. They're going to be afraid of the name of Judah. They're going to be afraid of the name of God. And we see this with Rahab the harlot when she lets Joshua and the spies in and helps them escape. And she's actually going to be one of Jesus' ancestors. Not all of it's coming out of Israel. God's going to adopt and bring in people from these other nations, but only if they... If they, yeah, I guess because I use but, only if. It says, I will cause confusion among all the people to whom you come. Has he done that before? Caused confusion to protect something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when did he do it?
Tower of Babel.
Tower of Babel. He caused confusion because they were all going to do what? What were they rebelling against? Or who?
Him.
Him. They're rebelling against him, against God. God's like, I can't save you if you don't love me, if you don't like me, if you're not going to listen to me. So he caused confusion. Luckily, he didn't wipe them out. Luckily, he didn't destroy the world in fire and brimstone because who hadn't been born yet? Jesus. You see, with God's wrath, there's also mercy. That's why he caused confusion instead of wiping them out. He's protecting the continuity of the human race to get us to the bloodline, and it gives them a chance to do it.
Come on, God.
Yeah, it gives them a chance to but if.
Put that on a shirt.
We need to put that on a shirt, don't we? And it says, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. Anybody know what that meant in a military when they turn their backs?
To retreat.
It's a surrender. Just keep going. So they're standing at it, and Israel's walking through, and they're like, wait a minute, I know that banner. I know that standard. That's the God of Israel. Those are the people, they turn, and they walk, and all you see are their backs. No swords drawn, no weapons. What does that mean that you can do to them, though, if they're not facing you?
Take them out.
You could slaughter them if you wanted to. So what does that show when they walk by them without slaughtering them?
Mercy.
Mercy. What happens if they're a bunch of pagan worshipers and while facing that way, maybe they're worshiping the sun? What do you think God's going to have his people do? Destroy them. Now it's like, wait, that seems a little harsh, doesn't it? Who's he protecting?
Bloodlines.
He's protecting the bloodline. You guys are getting, I mean, you see how much more makes sense? Like, I get what God's doing. And he says, and I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before you. I'd run. A bunch of hornets. You know, dude, just like one or two on like your back deck or whatever. I'm like,
These are different.
can you imagine if I'm an Amorite and I see a swarm of them coming? I'm like, Ma, we gotta go. Verse 29, I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. So now we know this isn't going to happen immediately. This is going to take a little bit of time because God's trying to protect what?
The land.
The bloodline, the people, and what else? I heard it?
The land.
He's trying to protect the land. He says if you go there and it's desolate, unusable, are you going to thrive in the promised land and be there for Jesus to be born and David and everybody that's going to happen that we know is going to happen? No. So they've got to protect the land. And then what happens if there's no people to kill these animals and they're walking through?
They'll eat all the vegetation.
Okay, keep going. What else are they going to eat?
Each other.
Each other, the people, yeah. Remember, these aren't just like cats and dogs. They're out here in the wilderness. They're out here with wild animals that can kill them and hurt them. And God's saying, I'm going to do it this way. He just told you why. As a parent, this is why I'm going to do it this way. I'm not going to do it immediately because of this. Again, you have to ask the question why. It's answered for us. Verse 30, little by little I will drive them out from before you, until you have increased and you inherit the land. So what's God also waiting on?
Population.
Population. Are they a kingdom yet that can withstand other kingdoms? No. Are they a nation yet that can withstand other nations? No. There's not enough of them. Okay? And the land's not ready for them. So it says in verse 31, and I will set your bounds from the Red Sea to the sea, Philistia, from the desert to the river. I'm going to pause there. Go get a map and look at what the Jewish Zionists say that is their promised land that they're owed by God, and see if it matches up to the boundaries that God gave them. I do this in my eschatology book. They try to claim land that's not even theirs. You're going to see them do that with God too. They're going to try to take things that God owes them, and He never said He'd give them. Those are the people God made the altar and sacrifice for. Again, all of us, but these people. It says, for I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. Now, is God going to do this Himself? We saw the next part of the plan. Who's going to drive these people out?
They were.
But wait a minute, I thought the angel was going to drive them out. I thought these hornets were going to go, and the fear of God was going to go before them. Is all of this true?
Yeah.
You see that? You're going into a place that's already afraid of you. That's already doing with unnatural, natural elements, such as a swarm of hornets. And now they're afraid of your standard. The standard is your banner. Remember? So it says, Jehovah Jireh, my God, my provider, God, my banner, God, my strength. Any of those things. But then you're going to be the one that has to do it. You're going to be the one that has to lift the sword. You're going to be the one that has to walk by the person whose back is facing you. Huh?
Take the step of faith.
Exactly. I was going to say, you got to step out on the boat. You kind of took my thunder there. Between you and him, I never had no thunder. Jesus says, step out on the boat. Come out. Verse 32, you shall make no covenant with them. What do you mean them? What does he mean by them?
They're false
The
gods.
pagan nations. You shall make no covenant, no contractual agreement, no marriage covenant, no national peace covenant. You shall not join into any peace accords with these other cities. That's what they did with the 5 cities that God destroyed. They tried to join a peace accord against these people. He says, you shall make no covenant with them, protecting the bloodline. And it says, nor with their gods. Not just the people. But don't adopt their gods. Don't adopt their gods and goddesses. Don't bring their principles, their stories, their mythologies. And again, ultimately warning against the Nimrodic cult here. Remember, the Nimrodic cult from Babel is where all of these nations and their pagan deities came from. Verse 33, they shall not dwell in your land. We supposed to let pagan neighbors sit across from us, worshiping the sun god Ra and Horus while we're worshiping the God of Israel? No. He says, don't let them dwell in your land. Now remember, he already put in contingencies for strangers passing through, but you don't let them live among you. Again, it seems harsh, right?
Were they supposed to destroy their stuff?
No, they don't let them post up tent. And again, that's when the numbers come in. We're like, hey, we asked you to leave.
Well, as I'm saying, they got to push them out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so then, yeah, you were right. Sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah, this is going to be by force. God is not going to tell them, hey, just ask them to leave. If they won't leave, he says, run them out. And if they won't run out, what do?
Kill them.
He's going to kill them with the sword. It says, lest they make you sin against me. Did God just tell you why? He's explaining himself now. Does the God of the universe, the creator of the world, have to explain himself to you? He doesn't have to, but he wants to, so that you will what?
Obey him.
So you will obey him, so you will but if, and you will understand and love him. So he says, huh?
Oh. I was gonna say it's like a parent when you know that your child has a bad friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Amen to that, sister.
Uh-huh. Preach, testify. I'm going to read that again. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. Not only is he trying to protect them from them, but he's trying to protect them from themselves, because these pagan gods and goddesses tell you to give in to these things that God is telling you not to. You want something, take it. If you're strong enough and they can't protect themselves, that's your right to have it. And that's what these gods and goddesses do. It's a battle of power. And these pagan nations, if me and Mark were to go to war, my God versus his God. And if I win the war, then my God is stronger than his God. And if he wins, then his God is stronger than my God. My God can beat up your God. Let me do it, Cody Mason, you know.
Yeah.
My God can beat up your God. And you see this in the book of Daniel, when the Babylonians have beaten Israel because God gave them into the hands of the Babylonians because they didn't what? They didn't but if. They didn't obey God, so he had them enslaved by the Babylonians, but then God comes and gets what's his. They're drinking out of the cups to these pagan gods, God's Ark of the Covenant, all these things. And God comes knocking on the door, and that's the night they fell to the Medes and the Persians in battle. Superiority of God over these other gods, over these demons, to protect them from their principles, their worldview, their ceremonies, and sin. To entice you. If you got a pagan god that says it's okay to be intimate with anybody that you want, how does that go with God's marriage covenant? It doesn't. It doesn't click. They can't be together. They cannot coexist. And then it says, for if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. A snare, a trap. It's going to keep you. It's going to hold you. And again, what is God pushing? What is He protecting?
Bloodline.
The bloodline. Now, is it just the bloodline? He doesn't care about these people at all. It's just His bloodline.
Who cares about
He
them?
cares about the people too. That's why He says, so that you won't sin against me, and it'll be a trap to you. It'll be a snare. What's my time?
You're good, you have 15 minutes.
Huh?
15 minutes.
Let's do the first part of 24. Okay? Again, guys, law, direction. Now we're going to have an altar. What does the altar represent? Sacrifice. Atonement. God's law, God's heart. God's sacrifice and atonement through animals and through Christ is God's mercy and wrath mixed together. You see that mixed together. Because while this animal is dying, it should have been who?
Us.
It should have been us, because we didn't what?
Obey.
We didn't obey. There was at one time we didn't but if. It should be you. And when you look at the cross, the same thing. Who owes God an eternity in hell?
All of us.
You do. We do. Us. We owe God a death. We owe God a debt in hell. But He sent Jesus. Wrath and mercy. Now God's wrath just goes away, right?
No.
No. Who experienced it?
Jesus.
Jesus. You realize that it didn't just go away. God didn't just say, oh, okay, since Jesus is willing to do it, now I can skip it. Jesus experienced the full, total wrath of God. God the Son, a deity who should never experience anything remotely like that, experienced the full wrath of God in hell. And experienced human, physical pain on the cross. Emotional pain in the fact that the people He saved and the people He healed were the ones that cried out for Him to die.
Fear.
Fear? Yeah, we loving that one. Fear. Dude was so scared he sweated blood.
Spitting on him, whipping him,
Yeah.
cutting him.
See, there's I can take a lot of things, being bit and being spit on. So, they could whip me and I could probably be like, alright, but the moment somebody bites me or spits me, I'm like, alright, that's it. Y'all done crossed the line now. There's certain things a man can't take. Jesus took it all. Carried His own cross with Simon up on the Mount of Golgotha. You know, the place of the skull. It's amazing what Christ was willing to go through. What you see here is that extension. God is extending that to them and extending that to us. And we're going to see how excited they are about it. And they're going to keep it, right?
Uh-huh.
They're going to keep it for 100 years at least before they mess it up.
What?
Are these people that confirm this covenant,
Oh,
do they keep it and it's their children that mess up?
They mess it up.
no,
They're going to be the ones
yeah,
that mess it up.
them and their children.
It's not going to be long, that's for sure. Does anybody know one of the big things they do that's coming up? They worship a golden calf.
Oh,
A golden calf. What god is that? Anybody know?
God of beef.
That's Baal or Baal, as we call him. He's a cow god, Hebi,
Which is
in Egypt.
kind of like that clothing brand or whatever, Balenciaga.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like when you translate it from the Hebrew or something like that.
Yeah.
It says, I don't even want to say it.
I know what you're talking about, the weird kid one.
Yep.
Yeah.
But if you do a Google Translate,
What does it mean?
Translate it. Well, I don't even want to say that loud. Search up yourself. And you know who Baal is, and then find out what the other letters in that word mean. And so Baal is. And then,
Oh, wow.
These gods never went
So
anywhere.
yes, like
I think I've heard
Satan
that
hides
brand
himself in
already.
plain sight.
Yeah. Well, people say he doesn't even really
Yeah,
hide
he
himself.
Yeah, it's just those who know.
Yeah, exactly.
Look for him.
Yeah.
Exactly.
See it, and those who don't know look for him.
I can't think of the movie. You have to Google it, but it says the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he didn't exist. So by people giving credit to these goddesses, Satan's, no one's worried about him. That's what God does in the book of Revelation. He reveals who Satan really is. Satan is behind these systems. Satan was behind Babel Tower. He's behind Nimrod. He's behind this system. But they're going to worship Baal. Right after God, or right during the time that God's given them a law in stone, they worship another god. You think they're chanting his name? You don't think? I'm talking about Baal. You think they're chanting Baal's name? Yeah.
I hear this.
So it don't take long. That's the key. God is telling them, you're going to do these things, and I'm going to do these things.
Why Baal though? Why not any other ones?
Baal is the harvest god. He's the father of Harpades, which would be Dagon, the Philistine god. So he's a god.
That's the fish one, right?
Huh?
Dagon's the fish.
Dagon's the fish one. And again, he's also a harvest. Everything is for provision. So when they're praying for Baal to this golden calf, they're praying for provision. They want sustained life, which is ironic because what happens when Moses comes down? Anybody know what happens to 3,000 of those people worship the golden calf? Yeah. He says, kill the person to your left. Take your sword and kill the person to your left that worship the golden calf. And they die. Or they partake, or were they given the continuation of life? No, quite the opposite.
They didn't butt if.
Yep, they didn't butt in. That's exactly what it's so key. They didn't butt in. But it just shows you guys how quick these people are going to do that. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. So every time you hear them say, whatever you say, God, we're going to do. And we're like, you liars. You're not going to do it.
It sounds just like us then.
It does exactly like us. Exactly like us. Nothing new under the sun. Not people, not worldviews, not actions, and not sin. None of this is new. Might be new to us. Like when you buy a used car, it might be new to you. But it's not new. Which means the solution is not new. Same solution. This is chapter 24. Now he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Okay, so we got Moses. Moses represents the what?
Law.
The law. We got Aaron. Aaron represents the what?
Priesthood.
We got Nadab and Abihu. They're also going to be part of the people who moved the Ark of the Covenant. And then you have 70 of the elders of Israel. How does 70 break down in a multiplication fraction?
7, 7, 7.
7 times what?
7.
7 times
7
10.
times 10. 7 times 10. What does God's number 7 represent?
Perfection.
That's God's perfect number. And what does 10 represent?
Completion.
Completion. Okay, is it a coincidence that there's 70? You're going to see 70 a lot, by the way, of elders. And it says, in worship from afar, worship from a distance. Why can't they worship right up close to God?
They'll die.
Why? They're going to die.
It's holy land.
Yeah, they're not purified yet, not completely. That's the process of them being purified. Verse 2, and Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people go up with him. So are they going all the way that Moses is going? No. You actually see Moses on a mountain with God later too. Anybody know what mountain he's with? Moses.
Yes.
Okay, that's going to be Sinai. I'm talking about later in the New Covenant. You see Moses on a mountain again.
Transfiguration.
Mount of Transfiguration. He's standing there with Elijah and Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. That's Moses finally gets into the Promised Land. You guys get that reference? Moses doesn't get into the Promised Land here. He does when Jesus is there. That's his first entrance into the Promised Land, standing on the Mount of Transfiguration. And then verse 3, so Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all of the what? Judgments. Judgment. What does that word judgment give us a picture of, a Hebrew picture of? Separation. All of the things that are going to allow us to separate ourselves. Not only is Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders separating themselves from the rest of the group, but then who separates from that mini group? Who leaves the 70 elders, Nadab, and Abihu, and Aaron? Moses. Moses is going to separate from that group. And then God is going to give them a separate law from the ordinance He already gave them that doesn't contradict or supersede the other one. That's what He means by judgments. Okay? And it says, and all the people answered with one voice, just like Joseph's brothers did when they betrayed him, and Joseph's brothers did when they apologized, and Joseph's brothers did when they were kneeling in front of him. They spoke with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said we will do. Now again, it's like watching a football game on NFL Plus or NFL Presents. It's an old game that you know your team lost. So you're sitting there watching it, and even the good stuff means nothing because you know you ultimately lost because it's a game you've already seen. It says, all the Lord said we will do. And what are we thinking?
But if you...
No, you're not. No, you're not. We already seen it. Now, if we had we not seen it, right now we would be like, yeah, these people are ready. God taught them everything. Now they're never going to make another mistake because that's what His law does, right? His law is perfect, and His law works, right?
Yeah.
That's what you think, right? But who's the flaw and the problem with the law?
People.
Us. We're the flaw. We're the reason it doesn't work. So when it says all the words the Lord said we will do, you and I just roll our eyes. In verse 4, and Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. And he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. You see God establishing what's happening in heaven, this eternal truth. He's putting it now physical. Now you're going to see an actual altar. It's not going to be in theory anymore. You're going to have an altar that people are going to recognize and see continuously atonement for sin. Because He knows they're not going to... Would He have given them an altar if He knew they were going to obey the Lord like they said they would?
No.
So they're like, everything you said we're going to do. And God's like, let's go ahead and build that altar. Let's go ahead and get that altar ready. And they're like, no, we're going to listen. And God's like, just in case. Just in case. You never know what's going to happen. And God's like, dude, I've seen this movie. You guys don't realize how many animals are going to die on this altar. And again, what is God ultimately looking at a picture of? What did He see every time an animal went on that altar? Whose?
There.
Jesus. He saw His eternal Son die. Can you imagine looking over at your son and being like, man...
Well, He knew that He had to sacrifice because He couldn't trust us.
Exactly. It's because when they said all these things we will do, God was like, oh, no, you won't.
Yeah.
He knew you wouldn't, so He had to give this to him. And then it put it at the foot of the mountain. Again, the key at the foot of the mountain. The mountain represented, I told you who. Who does the mountain represent?
God.
Christ. Where do you see the people at His feet?
On the cross.
On the cross. The altar of sacrifice at the foot of the mountain. And He's on the top of the mountain, or the hill. Whose head is He over? By the way, little bonus star. Whose head is Jesus crucified over top of?
Goliath.
Goliath. That's why it's called Golgotha. The head of the place of the skull, it's named for Goliath's head. And then it says 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Now we got a physical representation of the physical foundation. And what is the old covenant built on the foundation of? 12 tribes of Israel. God ultimately with the 12 tribes of Israel. What's the new covenant going to be built on? The 12
apostles.
12 apostles. No. One kingdom, one church, but the 12 apostles. Verse 5, then He sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins and half the blood, and he sprinkled it on the altar. Now keep in mind, when we get to Leviticus, we're going to understand what these offerings are. We don't have a concept yet of these offerings. Okay? God is going to, in detail, explain this in the book of Leviticus and Numbers. That made me look real bad online there. Thanks for that.
Why was it young Israelite?
The young men? What are the old men doing?
Farming.
Yeah. Everybody's gonna have a role here in a minute. But He's calling out the young. Why does He want the young men doing
You're
this?
stronger.
Keep going thinking about it. What do they have less influence that the older people had?
Of the false world.
Yeah. You see that? So He's saying, hey, I'm going to start with the young ones. That way I can build this into their culture. And it's just kind of like Willy Wonka. You ever remember Willy Wonka? Why he says why he won't give his factory to an adult? He says an adult's going to want to do it his way. He's going to not listen to me and do it my way. He says, whereas a child, I could train up to do things the way I want them done, and then my factory continues the way I want it to continue. That's not what you got here. God's saying, I'm not going to just give it to some old adult. And again, they're not cast aside, but that's not who He's going to build it into. He's going to build it into the future generations. Now, is He only going to teach their children, or is He going to go after their children and their children's children? Okay? But then it says, I'm going to read it again, verse 6, and Moses took half of the blood, put it in the basins, and half of the blood, and he sprinkled it on the altar. Does anybody know where He puts the blood that's in the basin later?
On Himself.
He's going to sprinkle on the people.
On people.
So the blood on the altar connects God, and the blood on the people connects the people with who?
Jesus.
With Jesus. The blood of the sacrifice applied to God and applied to the people is the only way you get saved. Jesus had to present his blood of the altar, his own blood to God. We get a glimpse of that in Revelation, and we see it mentioned in Hebrews. He, the high priest, took his own blood and presented it to God. But then you and I get that blood on us when?
Baptism.
In our baptism. We're baptized into his death. We go back, time-traveling Christians, to the cross to be bathed in the blood of Christ. You see, again, always been the plan here. In verse 7 it says, Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, All that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient. So not only did they agree and say we're going to do it, but then they even said we're going to, but if. We're going to be obedient. You see that? So they're still saying, look, we're 100%. We're all in. Amanda, all in.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 8, And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. There you go. God connected back with his people through the sprinkling of the blood. And said, This is the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you according to all of these words. Does that sound familiar?
Communion.
Matthew 28, what was it? 28, somebody I might have a note. Matthew 28:28. Jesus took this and said, This is the blood of the new covenant. So when did the blood get sprinkled on the altar in the new covenant?
After Jesus' death.
Jesus' crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection. And again, we get our blood when? In our baptism. That's how we get connected. Now again, you picture the basin of blood, you picture the basin of water. Okay? Instead of having it sprinkled on you, though, we're dipped in it. You want to dip there? Dip, that's another word for baptism. Dip, plunge. Make sure everybody got that. I want to read that. No, I think we're good there. We'll stop. We don't want to do the mountain.
Is that why the Catholics do the sprinkling? Because of that?
No. They use a different Greek word to try to justify when they baptized Constantine. Constantine was too sick and in bed to be baptized, but he couldn't be the first Christian emperor if he wasn't baptized, because they understood what baptism was. So they came and got these barrels of water and they dumped them on him to count his baptism. And then when he got better, they said, now you need to be baptized. And he was like, well, no, if that counted then and it was good, then it counts now and it's good. And they said, okay, well, we'll just baptize people both ways. And since the priests kept getting dragged into the river because of their big purple robes and drowned, they were like, sprinkling and pouring would be better, which is the Greek word. You remember the Greek word from Gary Borderline's class? You guys all used to say it, remember? Rantizo. Rantizo. Yep, and baptizo. So they changed. That's how it got changed. Now, whether or not they took it back here and tried to justify it as possible, I don't know if that's the case, but no, that's not where it came from.
Why not just take
Huh?
cloaks off when you're doing it?
Do what?
Like, why not just remove
Because
the cloak?
the purple represent their kinglyship, their godliness. They can't take that off.
I didn't do that 1 second.
No.
Alright.
So again, remember that's the arrogance and the selfishness. And God's like, that's fine. I'm just going to, current of the river will take care of that. So guys, again, here it is. That's why I'm going to end there instead of the mountain of God. This is it. The blood was sacrificed, or Jesus was sacrificed. The blood was applied to the altar. He presented it as a high priest to God the Father, who accepted his sacrifice, accepted his atonement, and now we can be covered with that blood to be seen as a part of that right here. This is the blood being applied to you every time. And again, this is not exaltation where you're like, well, I'm going to take this and then I'm never going to make a mistake and God's going to somehow supernaturally make sure that I don't do this. No. This is to show you how human you really are. When you realize every time you come here, you got dirt on you, something you did, whether it's new or the same thing, that you're still struggling. But this gives you a chance to do what?
Be forgiven.
Yeah.
To do what?
What if?
To what if? This gives you a chance to what if? This gives you a chance to look at where you're falling short, to look at where you're not rising up and doing, to find out what your weakness is, your flaw, whatever that is. God is magnifying it, and not to show you how good He is, but to show you that He can help you, that He wants to help you. This is what it is. This is for us. The blood that they were waiting for. Again, they got temporary blood. We got the real thing. That should change the way we as Christians realize this plan of God. We got the real thing, the real deal. And then we get to do what? It said that Moses gave them a book that he wrote down all of the what?
Laws.
The judgments.
Judgment.
The judgments. This is your chance to separate from the group. Just like he did with the elders, Nadab and Abihu, Aaron and Moses, and then Moses ultimately separated from the group, and he separated himself to who?
God.
Moses went to be alone with God. Actually, it says he rose early in the morning, something that Jesus is going to do in Mark. He's going to rise early in the morning and go pray. Guys, look at yourself. Feel the weight of God's glory. That's what the word glory means, weight. Feel the weight of God's righteousness. What are you thinking? What's in your mind every second of every day? What are you loving? What are you dedicated to? What are you passionate about? Does it take you to God or take you away from God? And then ultimately, what are you doing? How are you acting? What does the world see? Does the world see that you're just like them, these pagan nations, and you just wear God's t-shirt? Or does the world see you as Israel with this reverent fear? To say, I don't know what they have, but they got a power, they got a life, they got a love that I don't know how to deal with. And then ultimately, hopefully, they come and say, I want to know what that is. That's what we're here for, guys. This is it. This is why we come together. We learn. We judge ourselves. Blood of the covenant. Okay?